Okay. Well, thank you for joining the very first subcommittee on in-kind donations. Um, I want to just clarify my role here. I'm here to support you all. And so I do have materials I brought to you and data, and I do have an expertise in how the public financing programs work. But I'm really more of a resource, and it's your decisions about the policies and what we should investigate more. And if you'd like me to research something or collect more data, that is absolutely something I would love to hear from you. Um, and then I'm gonna run through the agenda, but in a similar vein, you all absolutely have the ability to, change the agenda or adjust the how often we meet and how long we meet. It's really your subcommittee, and I'm just like the little staff member here supporting you all. So we're gonna dive in, but did everyone get my email with all the items in it?
I did not.
Are you not? I can forward to you again, Felisa.
That would be great. I'm
Yeah,
also just got back to work, so I might be just behind.
no worries. Okay, so I'm gonna forward this over. And I'm gonna send it to your Felisa.Higgins@SAU email, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha. All right, there you go.
Thank you.
No
Sorry.
problem. Okay, well, so what I sent you some items and just giving you a run of course. We have the agenda here. We have some language from the Multnomah County Charter uh, that addresses campaign finance particularly. I put together an in-kind donations fact sheet for you all that just kind of gives you the core information to have these conversations so everyone's working from the same page. And so let's dive into the agenda. Um, the other thing I'll say is just a reminder, of course, this is a public meeting, and so we already talked about how they're recorded. But if you all take any votes, there's a very specific way of doing it. And so we have to have a roll call vote if we ever do that. So if we're having a decision, we just have to make sure we follow that process. So I'm gonna just mark you all down as being here. Oops. Okay. Well, the agenda I crafted, but again, it's yours to adjust. Um, is we'll start with we'll do some policy overview and discussion, talk about the scope of the subcommittee and the core values and parameters. We won't spend a lot of time on that, but I think it's just important elemental stuff. And then we'll talk about the policy options and work through that fact sheet. We'll do a little bit of organizing just to make sure, since we're all on the phone right now, we can make some quick decisions around establishing the recurring schedule, organizing the following meetings agenda, requests for research, and adjournment too. And so before we start, does anyone have anything they'd like to add or change about the agenda?
I think once we get started, we'll, see. I do wonder, given the materials that you sent out, I'll be interested once we start discussing substance, whether how that changes our work.
Sure. Yeah. I had a feeling someone would ask about that. And so, I think, okay, why don't we just, before we start anything, actually it'd be really helpful for me is if we could just establish a recurring schedule since we're all here right now. Hopefully this is the last scheduling discussion we have to have. But what we're looking for is somewhere between 90 minutes and 2 hours twice a month, ideally on opposite weeks from the full IAC meeting, because it's challenging to have to prepare for both a full IAC meeting and subcommittee meetings in the same week. Yeah, Felisa.
Sorry, I know I said I didn't want to change the agenda, but I actually think can we talk about a little bit about substance first and then talk about a schedule? Because I don't want to commit to a bunch of time that we don't need.
Okay.
Agreed.
I totally hear that. Well, let's just make sure whatever time we do agree to, let's make sure to do it today before we leave. So just remember that. Do you all mind if we start with the would you like me to start with an overview of the fact sheet and like the kind of the core information, or do you all want to start with like defining the scope of this subcommittee and like what the values are we're working with? What would be your preference?
The latter.
The
I
latter.
agree.
I think so. I mean, my sense is, at least for me, and I think for my friends, I signed up for this committee because I thought this is going to be, or this subcommittee, because I thought this is going to be where all the interesting work is, because in some ways that is how it is at the state level, and that is how it is with the City of Portland's program. And I think that part of that was because the City of Portland's charter has kind of a carve out for anything that is allowable under the small donor program, that it is allowable within the contribution limits. But since the county's charter doesn't have that, as you indicated, like today, any in-kinds are limited to the amount, the 568 or whatever adjusted for inflation, which makes the work of this subcommittee like much less relevant. Or I mean, like in my mind, I mean, I don't know. I'm open to like whatever, but if we're talking about $568, like then there's a lot less to talk about. Um, so I mean, that's where I'm at is like, I mean, I'm interested in hearing, what Lisa and Becca think, but I'm almost of the mind of like, well, if that's really what we're talking about, maybe our time would be better spent in one of the other subcommittees.
My sense is, so here's my sort of values on all of this, and this is my first meeting. My general sense of this, and not just the subcommittee, but this generally, is that we actually should not be doing a bunch of unique stuff for Multnomah County, because the more unique things are, the more people violate the law because they don't understand the difference between the county and the city and the state. So I feel like some level of consistency is sort of just a core principle that I have in all of these discussions. And so the less unique that Multnomah County is from the state's only other public financing, which is the city of Portland, the better off we are. So I think on the in-kind contribution limits, I think to James's point, if it is limited that matches the county charter, we should either pick. It should either be, if we have a choice, then we should either choose the state choice or the city choice. I don't think we'd get a hole of getting something new. And if we don't have a choice, then I believe that this conversation is over, and I don't actually think we need another meeting.
Okay, well, we do have some constraints working with, but also there are some choice points too. So I can certainly, if we want to talk about like the constraints and the choice points, I can give a rundown of that. Becca, James and Felicia had a chance to speak. Did you want to say anything right now? And you're on mute.
You're not muted in WebEx, but it seems like you're muted someplace.
Or maybe your microphone's not connected.
Hmm. That's weird. I don't have anything as host saying that I muted one person. Okay. Becca may like log in, log out. That's totally fine. Yeah, I think, Felisa, just hitting on what you said, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in the next IAC meeting, but like one of the most common values that people have identified is making the program simple and understandable and straightforward. And I think a lot of people are coming at it from that perspective too. So I thank you for naming that and bringing that in. I think that is an important like ground level or like groundwork that we have going into this work.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Much better.
Yay. And now you can hear my dog barking. Sorry about that.
So we were just saying, Becca, Felicia, I can dive in and do like a quick overview of the constraints we have, but the other two members of the subcommittee had a chance to speak, so I want to give you a chance if you had anything you'd like to say before we do that.
I will say ditto to both of the things that they said.
Okay. All right, well, why don't we just walk through the fact sheet first, because that seems to inform everything else we do here. So, at the very top, I have key questions I wrote down, which we can kind of keep going back to. I kind of envision the fact sheet as something that is a living document, and we keep growing. If we have more meetings, we keep like adding more things to it. So please like view this as like a document that is going to be continually developed. Let's talk about the Multnomah County Charter. So Multnomah County Charter has a limit set in it, and that limit adjusts for inflation. So a couple weeks ago, that new contribution limit was set at $603 per donor. So donor, meaning individual or political committee, can give up to $603 for a candidate running for Multnomah County. And again, that is adjusted for inflation every other year and odd years outside of elections. And it's based on the state's definition, which I put below too. Unlimited donations are allowed under the small donor committees. But the definition of small donor committees is pretty restrictive. And the SDC definition is that SDC cannot accept more than $122 per individual per calendar year. That is defined in the charter. James, go ahead.
So both of those things I think are superseded by HB 4024.
Yes.
It no longer allows unlimited, donations. It caps the amount of donation that even a small donor committee can give, but it does increase the per donor limit on small donor committees above the 100.
I don't think.
Okay, I think Felicia, you froze.
Your grandfather in.
So
Yeah. Did you say their grandparented in? Yeah.
The
Multnomah County.
Multnomah County and City of Portland's programs are grandfathered in because we didn't change the caps for the city and we didn't change the caps for the individual donors. We didn't change any of that. The only thing that is superseded is the sort of setup of the small donor committee.
yeah, let's talk about the legislature. So HB 4024.
Sorry, James, before we move to that, can I ask some questions about the charter? So this is language that came from the ballot measure, right? All of the in-kind limitations came from the ballot measure. And there is nothing that we could do in setting up a small donor committee and a structure of in-kinds within a small donor committee program in code that would, because I can't remember where this is in the charter, like what that would allow for in-kinds within a small donor program that will not be impacted with the charter limitations. Or is it, do you know what I'm talking about? Like, have you gotten legal counsel advice to say that you cannot set up something in code or statute that allows for in-kinds within a small donor committee structure?
Well, there is no cap on small donor committees structure.
I'm sorry, not small donor.
Individual, or nonprofit or organization.
I
think
mean,
I know.
Financing program.
I think I know what you're asking about. Let me try to answer it, but if I get it wrong, feel free to correct me. So we have had, everything we do is in consultation with our legal office, the county attorney's office. And the understanding that we have is that the limit is as high and as broad as we can go, unfortunately. I shouldn't say unfortunately, I'm trying to present unbiased information, but the constraint is that donation cannot be set a limit cannot be set higher than $603. And we cannot include more organizations in what are allowed to give unlimited donations. We are allowed, the understanding I have is that we are allowed to be more constrictive than the charter limits. Don't know if there's an appetite for that, but what I'm saying is like that is a choice point for you all to make, is if there's any point here that you want to be more restrictive. You would likely have that ability, although of course like that's something we would want to like verify first. The small donor committee definition is, you know, set in the charter, and that's where we get the $122 number from. HB 2000, did I answer your question right?
Yeah, and I'm sorry for the confusion. I didn't mean small donor committee. What I meant is, as we're looking to set up a public financing system, for example, like the City of Portland's small donor program, that's a public financing match. What I hear you saying is that even if we're setting up a separate program that is different and distinct than any campaign finance system that currently exists, we couldn't say in this configuration, in this new public financing program, in-kinds are allowed, because it would still be in
which is what the City of Portland does, right? The City of Portland says is if you opt in to the small donor match program, then you have a different set of rules around in-kinds.
but
You don't opt into the small donor match program, then your in-kind limit is the limit.
603. Yeah, you are allowed to give in-kind donations. It's just they're limited to 603.
Yes.
right, but in the City of Portland, it's limited to $10,000 and of democracy activity. So what I'm, to James's point, you know, defining what you can in kind up to $603 is not, shouldn't take us 4 meetings to, you know what I mean? So like, yeah, that's super unfortunate. And it would take a charter change to a vote of the people.
But under this establishment of a small donor, if you opt into the public financing program, Daniel, is there flexibility in creating an in-kind? Then in-kind regulation if you opt into the public financing.
Unfortunately not. So,
Okay, so
with
I
the
guess we don't
city's-
really have anything to talk about then.
Yeah, so with the city's charter, the city's charter has an exception, like it basically says public matching programs can create their own rules, and that's why Portland's program allows up to $10,000, as you were saying, Becca. There's no carve out in the county charter. It is an exception for like the only exception allowed is for the dollars that the matching program actually gives out. And so like there's a contribution limit for $603, but obviously the matching program can give well in excess of it because that is not considered like a donor under the limit.
So, but I think to James's original point, I think we're done. Like we don't really need to talk about.
Oh shoot, we had Felicia, you froze out one more time. Felicia, I think we lost you. I'm not sure if you're still with us. And Becca, you're muted again. Oh God, we have so many tech issues
Sorry, I was
today.
just saying, I'll text Felisa and let her know if she can't hear us that she's frozen.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think just going back to 4024, which is a legislative bill that passed, that there's 2 things to know about that. Number 1 is that doesn't go into effect until 2027. So actually, I guess it will not be in effect for the first cycle that this program exists for. The second thing is that 4024 allows for small donor committees, but they're called state small donor committees. This is a little confusing, but organizations can basically choose to be only one of the other. They can either be a county small donor committee or a state small donor committee. the state small donor committee has much higher thresholds for who can give. It's up to $250. Um, and
Sorry, I'm on my phone now, so because I'm on my phone, so I'm going to try to restart my computer and see if I can get this WebEx to work.
yeah, I was just giving a brief rundown of 4024. And so yeah, I mean, so basically organizations can choose between being a state small donor committee or a county small donor committee. Under
No, they
our
can't.
rules, it looks
No, under
we had one.
4024, nope, under 4024, it preempts all the small donor committees and makes them the same. It makes them the state rules.
Okay, that is something I should check with county staff on because I think there's a division of understanding here.
I will
I
say,
mean, that's
having
your
spent
understanding, right, James?
Well, yes, I agree with you on that part, and I think I don't agree with you on the other part. And I have talked to both the county officials about this and the city like attorneys about it, and there's a lot of different understandings. And I will say, to Daniel's point, which I'm sure is the information he's operating under, the county believes, oh, there's still these county small donor committees that can only accept up to $100 that are different than the state, which I believe, I agree with you, Felisa. I don't think that's true. I think HB 4024 said if you're a small donor committee anywhere, you are now required basically to allow up to $250 from your donors. But I will say, I believe the county attorney, their interpretation differs from ours. So I don't know, like, I think that's what Daniel's operating under. So
Got it.
I don't know how we want to move forward with that, but I agree with you on that point, Felisa.
And
I
then
think,
I think on the cap of the small donor contribution limits, I think you think we capped the small donor contribution limits and superseded the counties and the cities. I don't think we did, because then it would throw off the city of Portland. The contribution limits cap would throw off the other caps. So I'm pretty sure we specifically didn't do that. But I
My
feel like we can go back to
recollection,
lead council and request. We can go back to lead council and ask.
yeah, my recollection is that the way that we grandparented in the city and county programs was basically to say any entity, including, there's no, I think, reference to like specifically Multnomah County or City of Portland, and it's basically any municipality can adopt lower limits than what are in HB 4024, which is why the like $500 limit or whatever $603 limits are there still at the city and the county. But it, I believe, puts a cap for, you can't, no, school district or new city, if Bend wanted to pass new limits, they can't pass
can't
limits
do
that
it.
are
Yeah.
higher than 4024.
Yeah.
That's right. But the small donor, I feel like we should just go back to lead council on this, because I feel like it preserved that piece, preserved the small, it
donor.
didn't implement the small donor cap. Yeah.
that is
That
a
was
crucial
our
point I make.
understanding. So I feel like
Yeah,
we
there's
can
definitely
just ask LC.
that'd be great. I think, it looks like there's definitely some different understandings out there. But it would be important to know that too, because if small donor committees are, if the state's definition is going to supersede the county's definition, then there is language in the charter that allows for SDCs, small donor committees, to give unlimited amounts. So would that
Yeah.
mean that the does that mean that HB 4024, if there's a supremacy thing going on here, does that mean that that would no longer be the case? The SDCs would be able to receive up to $250, and then they could give what is it, 5 times the number of $5 for every member they have. Is that right?
It depends on the race, and the county and the city races aren't defined. Like the county, city, school board DAs races I don't think are defined, if I recall that. I'd have to go back and look.
I
Right.
thought they
Yeah.
were equated with like ledge races.
Oh yeah, you're right. They are. They're
They're
state
the same rules,
represented are, yeah.
legislative rules, yeah.
Yeah. Well, let's apologies for any like misinformation if I brought any to the table here. But like let's definitely get that cleared up. That's obviously a critical thing to understand. So yeah, if we're so I think let's put a pause on that one. But yeah, so that is some rundown of the charter. We do have that constriction. The If anything, if anyone qualifies as an SDC currently, small donor committee, they are allowed to give unlimited amounts, and that would include in-kind donations. But it's a pretty narrow definition of who would qualify, just because, you know, they're limited to donors who are giving them $122 or less a year. And my understanding is there's not that many organizations that meet that threshold. But I mean, there certainly are some out there, and so that language is, you know, that is something that we are allowed to like adjust. I mean, so that's where we are on the charter language. The charter cannot be changed unless it's with the votes of the people too, or there's like something that changes at a statewide level, or state policy level too. So that is a pretty significant constriction that the program does have too. James, I thought I saw you raise your hand earlier. Okay. So I'm hearing people say like there's not a lot of interest in continuing. I will just remark, just for like my purpose as staffing and supporting you all, that you all do have the ability, likely, to set in-kind limits that are lower than the 603, or set
Yeah.
in-kind limits that are like more tailored than the wide ability that you have to give under the charter. I don't sense that there's a lot of appetite for that, but I do want to let you know if there is, that is something that you all have the ability to do too.
I don't have an interest in that. I
No,
feel like
neither do I.
$603 is, I don't know actually what you can in kind for $603, maybe a night of phone banking. And so I don't have an interest in going lower than that or making any other changes.
Okay.
Do I? And I'm just thinking, about what Felisa said in the beginning about consistency. And when we did the, I don't know, values exercise, or when you asked us when we did the survey, what are the 3 kind of principles? And when you shared that back out, that was a consistent theme in terms of, how do we ensure we're developing a process that does not lead to confusion and that aligns with other, whether it's the city of Portland and or the state, to where we are making sure that it is an easy program to comply with. That, coupled with another value that was consistent with everyone's feedback, which is kind of access and equitable ability to participate in the program in all the different ways. I'm struggling with it's never going to be aligned with the city of Portland, so it's going to be super confusing for all participants, candidates, and individuals and groups who want to participate. And the only way they can participate is in kinding. And then there's the access issue, where some individuals and groups can only participate by in-kinding. So I'm just, how do we, so that I think I'm going meta, which is like going to a bigger place of like, how are we, if there's no ability to develop an in-kind option in the Multnomah County's public financing program, that is, that's just sitting with me, and that's really, really too bad.
Yeah, it is a constraint, pretty significant one. I do want to clarify, and I think we're saying the same thing, but I just do want to make sure I do my due diligence here and clarify that, in-kind donations are still allowed under this program. It's just that they are limited to a really small number. Relatively, as really small as in 603. Yeah, I think there is also a question about like individuals giving in-kind donations. Individuals are allowed to give in-kind donations under the Portland's program, and it actually trades off with the regular contribution limit. We have another subcommittee working on contribution limits, of course, and that policy has not been recommended yet. But I think that is another choice point too, is like, do you all have any specific rules that you want to set around individuals giving in-kind donations?
Well, I mean,
Well,
now
it's
that
capped at $603, so I don't, sounds great. Capped at $603.
Okay.
Thanks.
I mean, I do, when the folks who are talking, who are having the conversation about contribution limits, I don't think that conversation can happen in the absence of the inability to in kind in a significant way, right? When they have conversations about what those limits are and who can contribute. I don't know. It's like this is a leg in the stool of democracy participation. And so if you remove it, I can't immediately see how it's evened out on the other side. But I just wish it weren't in the charter as such a huge limitation. And
So
you
that's my
can't,
other question. Can I ask a question about that, Daniel?
Sure.
For the people who are talking about the contribution limit, because we're not talking about going on a referral on a charter change, right? That's not the discussion this group was having. They're having a discussion just on the matching program. Is that the,
Yeah, so yes and no. Yes, in that their focus is on contribution limits within the matching program. Like if people opt in, what contribution limits do they follow? But it is absolutely within the purview of the IAC to recommend that there is a charter change. Like if you all decide that you want to recommend that the county commission pass a refer out charter amendment, or that or organizations do it outside of the accounting process, you absolutely have the ability to make that recommendation too.
well, and just looking at what I mean, part of our charge is to consider if there will be a dedicated funding mechanism for this, and looking at other jurisdictions who've developed public financing system, they absolutely had to go to voters to make that change. So, and I mean, I appreciate us being broken up into subcommittees to dive into the work, but now I'm fast realizing that they're all connected. So like if you take out, the in-kind ability or significantly limit it, it's going to impact the contribution limit conversation. That's going to impact the financing conversation. That's going to impact, yeah. So I'm assuming that you will share this information with the folks who are, I can't remember, is it Kari and
Cool.
Marshall that are doing contribution limits?
Yes,
Well-
and to answer, I think that another point that you're bringing up is that this was absolutely envisioned as a constant dialogue and communication sharing between the full IAC and the subcommittees, so everyone's still working from the same page. Because you're right, like any information that comes up in one is going to impact the other. So everyone needs to be informed about what's going on and what changes are in the works too, and where people are leaning on policy issues. So that's absolutely part of the process. It's just that like we need subcommittees because we can't possibly get through all the work in just full committee meetings. Felisa.
I guess so. I just want us to drive to sort of like where we're at in this meeting. So I feel like I just want to set. So we have two questions that we need to confirm with Ledge Council. So I can go ask the legislator to get those questions answered. The second piece of that is I think what we have is consensus that if the limit is $603, that we don't need to have a further discussion about in-kind contributions. Am I right in that we have consensus on that?
Can I put a caveat depending on maybe one of the questions that you'll ask legislative
I'm
council?
about to say something next
Yeah.
on the in-kind contributions. I want to make sure that we're walking through systemically. So I'm seeing head nods that we don't need to have a further conversation if the cap is $603, that we're done having a conversation about in-kinds. One of the questions I have for this group is I feel like both the in-kind in the state in the state statute and the in-kind in the city of Portland, the in-kind limits in the state statute and in the in-kind limits in the city of Portland small donor committees, I think we are collectively fine with. And so if there is a further discussion about a charter change, then maybe we should come back and discuss in-kind contribution limits based sort of with the sort of box that is like either the state box or the city of Portland box.
How do other members feel about that?
So just to clarify, if and when we have an in-kind conversation about in-kind donations, it's really about what we would either recommend as a charter change, and if it's aligned with the city of Portland or aligned with the statute. It's not, obviously, it's not how we, move the tiny needle around 603, but it's in that bucket. We would come back together to see what we would recommend as a charter change. And that is the only path to impacting. The state cannot supersede the
The
charter.
state could supersede.
Because
They
that
could.
could be, so, I mean, we have like two.
So we could make a recommendation to this group that you go back to the groups that are having the discussion at the state that says, we want to make a recommendation to the legislature that we supersede local governments on the in-kind limit. We could do that. I'm also fine with that as a committee member. Like I am very much wed to, we should either pick the city of Portland or pick the state, but having another like bespoke campaign finance system for groups who really want to do fundamental like democracy outreach work is just too much for them. It's too much to ask of them.
Yeah. If I can just interject real quickly, as I'm of course not a committee member, but I suspect that we're going to have this conversation continually throughout this whole process. So, it's your recommendation to make, but a broader way of putting it may be like that you all that like localities that develop public financing programs are allowed to develop their own rules within that. And then the policymakers who design the public financing program here can try to match it up as closely as possible to other localities if that's what they desire to do. So you might just be able to like, open
actually,
the door.
I'm not saying that, to be super clear. I do not agree with all of these bespoke campaign finance systems. I think it creates a problem with compliance. So I'm not saying local policymakers should come up with their own brilliant ideas and do their own little thing for every school board and every special district and every fuck all. I don't think so. I think we should pick one. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying my recommendation as a committee member here is if it's $603 and that's the cap, we have nothing left to discuss. If there is going to be a charter change, and there is a bigger charter change, I would like to focus this committee's discussion points on either aligning with the city of Portland or aligning with the state legislature. I think Becca introduced a third option, which was, could our recommendation be, our recommendation is to say to groups, go back to the state legislature and preempt local governments from having their own in-kind. Those are the three sort of options that are on the table. I think option one, we all agree with. If we're talking about $603, we have nothing left to discuss. Option two, there's a charter change. That was an open question. Becca introduced option three. And then you introduced we have the rights of local governments, and I'm saying I do not agree with that.
Okay.
So in my opinion, if we're trying to get to consensus, and I haven't heard from James and Becca on options 2 and options 3.
So walk me through it again, Felisa. So option 2 is which one?
Option 2 is if we are going to have charter, if we have to go to the ballot on charter change, that we would come back together as a committee and discuss the charter change to be either aligned with the state in-kind exemptions or aligned
with the city of Portland in-kind exemptions. That if the county has to go out on a charter change for this, that we would make that recommendation. And then option 3 was, and then you're clear about option 3, James.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I'm 100% on board that we would have to come back together if we're talking about a charter change, for sure. I feel like that's separate than like, would I for sure want to commit to like either the state or the city? I don't know. I think you and Becca kind of had an agreement about wanting to align, as much as possible with the city, which, from a simplicity standpoint, I want, like to the extent that we can make things as simple as possible, yes, but I also don't want to take off the table that we could do like a better program at the county. So for instance, if we decide to do like democracy vouchers, not even requiring like the small donation, but like send voters, vouchers, like I would be open to that as I don't want to like just match the city because that's a program that already exists. I like, to me, there's like a bit of a balance between like what would be best for, Multnomah County and what would be best for like making it simple for users of the system, both candidates and organizations and entities that are trying to participate. But I'm not like exactly willing to say, oh, for sure, whatever, the city's doing or whatever the state did. But I do agree that we would have to come back together if we're talking about a, charter, but I don't think that there's much for us to do if we're not talking about a charter amendment.
The other thing I'd say about the charter amendment, I mean, I don't think this is going to be the only issue that this committee has a conversation around that might be a potential charter amendment. Like I said, there's a funding mechanism conversation, if that's anything. There also might be other things that we find in the Multnomah County's campaign finance charter section that are hindrances or wouldn't necessarily align or be beneficial to a public financing system, right? So I'm also wondering, you talked about this as an iterative process, Daniel, I appreciate that. How are we having what, if anything, are we recommending? What's in the bucket of potential recommendations as a charter change?
You asking like what's currently in the bucket?
Well, I mean, how are we having that conversation? Like, what is the compartment? What is the structure for that conversation? This is one issue that we've identified will want to revisit. Are you just kind of tracking it and then bringing it back to the larger group? Like, if the contributions committee, once they review the limitations within the statute, they might come up with something like, oh, this is a problem and we need to change this because it's limited in the statute. They might have another recommendation that either is, leads to confusion or they would want to change.
Yeah, I think I understand your question. So right now we don't have an established structure to talk about charter changes specifically. Absolutely have the ability to set that up too. It looks like this, I would say like based on, I don't want to presuppose any other members or like speak for anyone else. I will say like based on other conversations that IEC members are having, it does seem like this is becoming a through line. And so, I would imagine that there would be a broader consensus for a desire, to have like a specific conversation around charter change or like set up a specific subcommittee to focus on it. So what I'm saying to you right now is we don't have an existing structure, but it does become such a pervasive conversation. I bet we probably should set one up.
On a related
So
note, when we're talking about alignment, for example, with the city of Portland, I know that the commission has talked about adjusting their in-kind limit. So it's like that could be a moving target. And so I would like to be able to be in conversation with them about how hard and fast their in-kind definition and limits are from here into the future, because it's adjustable, as I understand it, that if they can
Yes.
adjust their limitations really at the vote of the commission. And so I would hate for us to align with the city of Portland's definitions of what's in kinded and the limit in a very specific way, and then have it changed, and then have the county commission have to realign anyway. So what are can we get in communication with, or in alignment, or even in conversation with their commission? I would actually love to hear from them about the rationale and conversation that they have when they talk about how they developed the in-kind definitions and limitations, since that was not in the ballot measure, that was not in the charter. The commission came up with the limitation.
I can speak to much of that, but I
Yeah.
know I'm happy to provide a lot of answers to that. But Felicia, you've had your hand raised and want to give you a chance.
No, I really am just kind of driving us through it. I'm a big meeting driver. So I feel like what we have is there's no discussion to be had on the 603. And if there is charter change, then it's not I don't feel like it's a committee that says, okay, yeah, I feel like the whole group needs to say, actually, yes, we do need charter change based off the various committees, and that we would get back together if the whole group decides, actually, there is going to be charter change, to make a recommendation on that charter change and have further discussions. Without that, we can go down the city of Portland alignment, we can go down the state, we can have all that conversation. It doesn't matter if there is no charter change.
Are you saying that like the full IAC should not be discussing this policy until charter changes on table? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that there's no value in discussing an in-kind any changes to we don't agree. This committee has one set of agreement, right? One set of consensus, and that is if the in-kind limit is $603, that is it. There is no further discussion, and we do not care. So we're not going to meet ever again. I feel like the second set of consensus that we have is if the whole IAC agrees that we have so many changes that there has to be a referral to the voters for charter change, then this committee should come back together and discuss in-kinds as related to that referral to the voters. Those
Okay.
are the two things we have consensus on. You
I appreciate
mentioned
it. Thank
that
you for clarifying.
we would have an IAC subcommittee on whether something should get referred to the voters or not. I don't think that's a subcommittee discussion. I think that is a whole group discussion based on the subcommittees you already have. And our subcommittee has reached consensus that if we want in-kind changes, and I think I heard we're open to those changes, like democracy vouchers or all of those things. So we're open to having the discussion about those changes. But that means then we are open to a referral to voters on charter change. So those are the two things that we have complete consensus on.
James.
So I am kind of remembering. So Felisa, the disagreement that you and I had before, which is just you're going to send a question to Legislative Council to get a response back on if Multnomah County small donor committees are going to have any caps. That does actually remind me then. So if Legislative Council comes back and says, you know, the Multnomah Charter doesn't cap small donor committees, and HB 4024 doesn't cap small donor committees, then I guess there is actually a question to be had here as to whether participating candidates in the public matching program, you know, if they could accept an infinite amount from a small donor committee and still participate in the program. So there is, like, I guess depending on what Legislative Council comes back with, that feels like something we might need to discuss.
Even if Legislative Council comes back with that, you would still need a charter change to change it. So if Legislative Council comes back and says, no, the limits that the small donor committee, we did not supersede the limits that the small donor committees can give. The limits that the small donor committees can give is in the charter. So to change it, you would have to go back and say, we need a charter change. I am fine at this point, by the way. I just want to say, just to be super clear, I am fine with preemption. I am fine with the state saying this is now the in-kind limit, period, across the board. I'm fine with the state saying this is now the limit on the like. I don't actually care if small donor committees are unlimited or they're capped at the state level based on. I actually don't have a dog in that fight. My dog in this fight is entirely about consistency because of because being an organization who's trying to operate in this environment and actually help candidates is a fucking nightmare.
Sure. So I'll phone a friend, but I think that the outflow, how much small donor committees can give, is not limited in the Multnomah County Charter.
It is not. That's right. It's unlimited in the Multnomah County Charter.
Right. So then if
So if the
HB
legislature is
40
preempting the charter on it,
So the legislature definitely I mean, you and I are in agreement that the legislature preempted the inflow to small donor committees. The Multnomah County Charter says they can only take $100. You and I are in agreement, which is in disagreement with the Multnomah County attorney, but put that to the side,
That's right.
that they can now accept $250. The question is that there's nothing in the Multnomah County Charter that says, or limits how much small donor committees can give to candidates. And
That's right.
I thought that you were saying before, and one of the questions that you were asking the Ledge Council was, I thought that you were saying we grandparented in, meaning no changes. That's not my understanding, but if that is the correct understanding, then there is an issue to discuss, because small donor committees, can today give an infinite amount to a candidate, and would we want them to be able to give an infinite amount to a participating candidate in a public matching program? I would advocate we do not want them to be able to give an infinite amount.
But I think to get to that, if we do not want them to give an infinite amount in a public matching program, you then need charter change to answer that question under small donor committees. So because it's written into the charter that they can't.
No, but
And
right.
I feel like that's the question we should ask for the county attorney and the city attorney. And I feel like we should get this question answered from Ledge Council.
I heard Daniel say that we could limit all we want. We
Right.
just can't expand.
Yeah, because
Right.
it's a
So you
voluntary
can limit.
program.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, because it's a voluntary program. I see.
The candidate
Okay.
is basically signing a contract saying, hey, I won't take anything more than whatever we set.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's right. So the the charter the current charter says that like small donor committees can give unlimited amounts. If you all wanted to make a decision that the small donor committees are limited to $1 million in kind donations, you have that authority to do it, because it is more restrictive than what the charter currently allows. So basically, like, the rule of thumb
And
is,
I'm willing to say, if the answer to that is that small donor committees can give unlimited amounts of in-kind, I'm willing to say right now, my position is we should align with either the city of Portland or the state of Oregon. And I get that the city of Portland can change theirs at any time. That's fine with me, as long as it just says Multnomah County will comply with the limitations set by the city of Portland's public financing subcommittee, blah, blah, blah. That sounds great. Or it says Multnomah County's in-kind contribution limits for small donors participation in the small donor committee will be limited to the state's set amount. Fine with either of those things.
I think the one thing I will say, and again, just doing my due diligence as a staffer, is that I can tell you that the in-kind donation rules for the city was like
Yes.
one of the most criticized things we ever had. And like the current way it was set up, with like who qualifies as a small donor organization, and the fact that like SDOs and non-SDOs can give different amounts and for different things, and directly provided versus non-directly provided, that was harshly criticized by a lot of members that ran against it or ran under the program. And I imagine would be a subject of significant change. I don't want to speak for that program, of course, they may decide not to, but I know that user experience was mostly negative on the way the city runs their in-kind donations. So if you want to align with the city, like that's certainly your recommendation to make. But I would say like if it's possible to make a even simpler version of the in-kind donation rules, that might be more popular with the users of the program.
Like I said, I'm fine with aligning with the state.
Okay.
So I don't know, Becca, James, do you have thoughts?
Well, I mean, my general principle, I guess, is that when someone is opting into like a public matching program, that taxpayers are kind of like footing the bill. Part of like what they're signing is, hey, I'm not going to take as much money as I could have otherwise taken if I wasn't getting money from the public. And so aligning with the state in that scenario, they would be basically agreeing to the same thing that non-participating candidates are agreeing to, which doesn't sound good to me. Now, aligning with like the city's program, I do think, because I mean, at the city, you know, they're effectively accepting you know, the limit for non-participating candidates is infinite. And well, sorry,
Yeah.
right. It's not infinite, but there's a different amount and they're kind of accepting you know, $10,000 cap. And so, you know, I think like I would be open to you know, aligning. I do, you know, I would like for it to be simpler at Multnomah County, but like the nominal dollar amount, I think I'm probably okay with. But yeah. So I don't know. I think probably you and I could be like of the same mind on this.
Becca, did you have something you want to add? It's okay if you don't.
Yeah, just a couple of thoughts, which just reiterating I think what folks have said is to the extent that we can make it as simple as possible. And I actually agree that the city of Portland, even while it's like a thing and it's established, it actually isn't not user friendly for
Nobody
all
uses
participants.
it.
Right. And so maybe we can compel them to improve their process. But I also agree with you, James, which is if we align with the state, there really isn't a differential between participating and non-participating candidates if we're
Well,
kind of incentivizing people to
participate, but I do feel like I feel like there's like it's not a incentive to participate, but I feel like the fundamental reality is the limit on who can actually in kind in the state, who can give the in kind components is very real. So I feel like they're both limits, and I get like this like I don't think in kind is what in kind is not what's going to incentivize people to participate or really draw that difference. It's really the public match conversation.
Right.
Because especially because the in kinds in the state are very limited to very specific things. It's not broad at all.
That's true.
And so I don't think it's like, oh, I'm gonna participate because one organization like knock doors for me or not gonna or like that's it. It's gonna be the match that incentivizes people to participate or not, fundamentally.
Remind me, the state statute, it's member organization or member organization PACs and small donor committees can in kind.
Yeah. And then individuals can in kind about a certain amount for certain things. Like the individuals can in kind space and they can in kind like food and beverage, I think, for fundraisers.
So I think there's not so much for us to talk about for all the reasons that Felisa so eloquently described. And not to be annoying, but now I'm remembering there is one cycle, as Daniel pointed out, that happens before the state limits are in effect.
But we could
And
just we could just say Well, I guess that's a question though, because is there one cycle? Because if you go on a charter amendment, then
Hmm.
you're in a position where that it could eat that cycle. Does that make sense?
Can you say more about that?
So if you do a referral in November, so let's say we're amending the charter. So either we have something to talk about, and we're really talking about small donor committees at this point.
Mhm.
So the options are we then talk about an in-kind exemption for everyone, which is a charter amendment. And that charter amendment would either have to happen in May, which it's January and doesn't seem like we're on track for that. So that really is November. So then you wouldn't implement in November because you couldn't implement in November because of the filing deadlines for
Mm-hmm.
people running for office. So then that charter amendment eats that cycle.
Oh, I see what
So
you're saying.
then what we're really talking about is, depending on the ledge council question, is one cycle just particularly for small donor committees. And right now, I don't know how, very few people operate a small donor committee at the city, at the county, or at the city of Portland, frankly. I think that will change once that preemption comes in. Like, we will operate a small donor committee at that point, once that change comes into effect. But because very few people operate it, you're then talking about one cycle before that change comes into effect, James. So it eats that cycle anyway, is my guess. Eats that year.
If we go the charter amendment route, which I will say, which I'm, I'm open to that like discussion, but I mean, I am also cognizant of, thanks to former Commissioner Beeson and Jayapal and the chair, the current intent and the charge to our committee is to come up with recommendations for a program that would start in 2026. So if we say we're going to go, to charter, like we're saying, it's okay, like skip a cycle, which they've already like fought hard to get. So like, I don't know that like, I for sure want to say that. But I mean,
I am also fine. Like, the state, you could just put the state, you could say, we're going to align with the state. The alignment starts, even though the state starts this date, the charter aligns with the state starting this date.
okay.
I don't really
All right.
care.
Well, I feel like until we have some like answers, there's not other stuff for us to do then, although it was so delightful to see you all. And I
Well-
am wondering if we disband permanently or temporarily this subcommittee. I don't know. I feel like Felisa and Becca are so smart. Like, I don't want to add time to anybody's calendar, but I kind of wonder if we should be folded into, one of the other subcommittees.
Well, I think, on that point, first off, yeah, let's definitely get consensus on legislative council, because otherwise, like, it's hard to have an answer without an answer. And so, that would be great if you're willing to provide that. The second thing is that, if you all decide to disband or make any recommendation today, we do have to have a vote on it. So please don't go anywhere until we have that vote. And thirdly, yeah, I mean, if you all wanted to join another subcommittee, you're welcome to do that. Or if you want to kind of hold space, if you will, for a new topic to take on, because we will. What you could do is, what I'm saying is, like, if you want to temporarily disband, but with the knowledge that a new subcommittee could be formed around making a recommendation around the charter language, or we're going to be taking on some other major topics on the IAC. And I wouldn't be surprised if the IAC says we actually need a subcommittee on this topic. So if you want to, you could like temporarily disband, and then, with the knowledge that you could either like join another subcommittee, or you could come together around another topic.
I mean, I'm good with us tabling, like being a committee, but tabling, and you can convene us around an issue. And it's my understanding that we are all welcome and encouraged to attend any of the other subcommittees if we
Oh.
able, right? So, maybe I'll pop into contribution limits if
I don't. Oh,
Tuesday.
sorry.
Do we have, actually, will you share their the
That's
schedule?
what I was going to say. I don't think I've seen the schedule for the other subcommittees.
Yeah, I was waiting because actually you are the last committee to to establish a recurring schedule. So in the January 27th meeting, which is this coming Monday, I was gonna like bring an update around that. So I can provide that to you all. But like informally I can just tell you that most of them are going to be meeting that first week in February. And so, we have just bear with me 1 second. And again, I can bring you a full schedule then. But yeah, we'll have a subcommittee on oversight meets on February 4th. The subcommittee on violations and penalties meets on February 7th. And then the subcommittee on limits is it's going to be meeting on Wednesdays at the same time, actually at 11 a.m. So that'll be on Wednesday the 6th at 11 a.m. But again, I'll just bring you the full schedule on Monday.
Okay.
Okay, and so I just, as I'm drafting this, just before we all get off here, because I need to draft this question to Scott so that he can ask Pledge Council. So the 2 questions regarding campaign finance preemption for local governments. Does the state preempt local government small donor committees? So the money being raised into small donor committees is now set at $250 for all small donor committees. And can any local entity go below that? Go below or
So-
above that?
Do you want friendly
And-
amendments or do you want to?
I do.
Okay.
I want
If it
friendly
were
amendments.
me, I would say in that question, did the state preempt the small donor limit into small donor committees? Right? And you and I think the answer to that question is yes. And in my
Yes, we-
mind, and maybe you want to say like in parentheticals, like the current Multnomah County limit is $100. We believe that is now preempted to be $250 per donor.
Yeah.
We'll be
So-
at like the as of the 20.
Oh, well,
or
sorry,
27.
that HB 4024 preempts that to, right, $250 per donor. So that in my mind is question 1. And then,
Okay, hold on just a second. Let me type of that.
yeah, sure. Thanks so much for doing this, Lisa.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. Daniel, while she's doing that, can I ask you a question? The oversight committee, did the oversight committee also have funding mechanism, or is funding mechanism to the whole group?
Funding mechanisms to the whole group, and actually that's one of the first items we have on January 27th. We'll be talking about funding mechanisms and budgets, and then we'll also have I'll give you a presentation on methods of distribution, i.e. like vouchers versus small donor matching versus grant. Also, I do want to say back up, like I've noted the questions that you've had to us, and I haven't forgotten them. So I have like done research on which localities have both ranked choice voting and matching programs. And then the other one is I'm thinking I'm going to just put together a presentation on like all of the legal questions. So like what the Supreme Court has said so far, and then what HB 4024 does, and then how the city, what their legal constraints are, and like what are the interlocking mechanisms we have. So like I haven't forgotten about that. I'm just kind of waiting for the right time to bring this up.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Totally.
Okay, and then the second question, I feel like, can you restate, James, and I'll type it up?
Yeah, so in my mind, the second question is if HB 4024 does impose a limit on small donor committees that are in the Multnomah Charter, and like a contribution limit from small donor committees.
Yes.
So, as far as this committee, I feel like we're kind of the same mind about what we're doing. Do we need to kind of take recommendations back to the larger committee? Do we need to, anything that we've kind of decided here today, do we need to like have something formal, or will we just on Monday?
You definitely should have a vote on like, disbanding or tabling, whatever, however you want to phrase it. If you do want to make a formal recommendation from the subcommittee, you will need a vote on that too.
Well, two things. One is I think, and if we wanted to actually just set up a regular schedule and then not meet, if we have nothing to meet about, if only because I feel like we all three are very busy people, and if I don't get something on my calendar, it won't happen. And if we do find that there is a very robust conversation we need to have around in kind, because absolutely the whole committee wants to do a charter referral and we need to dive in deep, I want to be able to hold some time for that. And then if we have nothing to talk about, then then we'll have an hour and a half free that day. So if folks are okay with that, then I don't think we have to like vote or table anything. We'll just schedule. I mean, but then are we noticing meetings that might not happen? Is that also, it's a public meeting?
That's
Yeah, we do have
permissible. That is permissible, by the way. And it's one way that some people abuse the, public meeting stuff is just
We're not
schedule a million
this.
things.
It's on the record. It's being
are-
recorded. We did
right.
not.
What?
Right.
How about this?
Okay, should
What
we
if
take
you
a?
all-
Oh, go ahead, Daniel. Sorry, I was going to make a
I was gonna say
recommendation.
like
Go
one
ahead.
suggestion is you could just schedule for something for 2 weeks out and just hold that one, because we'll have a number of like subcommittee and full committee meetings in that time. And so then you might have a lot more clarity about whether or not you want to restart those with like content, and if you all decide like 2 weeks in there's just not enough information, we could just put out an, we wouldn't notice it, but then we could always cancel, and that's fine to cancel those things.
Does
that make
time
sense?
work in 2 weeks for you too?
I think that's fine. I feel like we getting back together and like even if it's like a 15-minute where we get back together and like here's the answers to the questions that we got, and now we have nothing to talk about. So then we can take
Especially
a vote
since
at
you're
that
not
point.
allowed to email me those questions, the responses.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
I'll have to ask.
that's right. You're not allowed to email the responses because that two of us
That would
constitute.
be a public meeting. And
Yeah,
how
it'd be a
come you
public
didn't
meeting.
invite the public
yeah.
to your email, Felisa?
Yeah,
I
if you
don't
ever
know
want
how
to
I would
just
add the public to my email, but I'm happy to add the public. If I could email the public, I'd really blow through that in-kind contribution limit real quick.
yeah, right, yeah.
Right?
If you I do That's why I do put you all on BCC so you can't respond to each other and start a conversation accidentally. But if you like want to send me something, I can absolutely like, distribute it among the full committee members too.
So this time or something like this time, sometime the afternoon of Thursday, the February 6th is good for me. Either this specific time or whatever, if y'all wanted to shift it.
My last meeting doesn't end till 5, unfortunately, on that day. But I'm free between 11 and 3.
On February 6th,
Mm-hmm.
I'm free from 1.
I could do 11. If that's what works for you all.
Okay. I'm just gonna take note of that. Just bear with me 1 second. Let me just write that down. I'll send you all a calendar invite.
Thank
you. Yeah, so let's see, Feb 6th at 11 a.m.
Great.
And then those questions are off to Scott, and so I'll have an update at our next February 6th meeting.
Thanks, Elisa.
Yeah, okay. And like, was there, when it comes to making any recommendation at all to the full IAC, did you want to make any now, or just want to hold until we have a little bit more information?
I feel like
I
we
think
don't
the
have any.
recommendation. I think the one recommendation that we have is if there is going to be charter change, this committee needs to come back and have a more robust conversation about in-kind limits.
Yeah, I was
just
gonna
for-
say, I don't think we have a recommendation about in-kinds,
Yeah.
like we have some recommendations about the structure of the committees,
Yeah.
but right.
Or even a recommendation whether or not there should be a charter change, right? So I would, however, at our next meeting, maybe like to get a temperature check of folks. I mean, there might be people who are absolutely like dead set against referring anything to voters, right? Like that is off the table for people. And I'm curious if I would just love to pose that question. Because if, more than half the committee feels that way, then that's
It's not worth Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not an
I
option.
think
Just stop.
the one thing I'll say is like I think I haven't presented this information to the oversight and the violations subcommittee just because like it's not as relevant to their work as it was to yours and the limits one. So there might be like some information, you know, different understandings too. But if you want, I mean, like we do have a limited time on Monday, but I could put like some time on the agenda for just discussion about the charter and recommendations around it and just get a temperature check if that's what you'd like me to do.
I would like you to do that because I also think to James's point, if we're actually going to do a charter change, then it has to be, you can't keep kicking it. It should be on this November's ballot. We shouldn't try to kick it into the next election and then we can't implement for another two. Like,
Yeah.
let's just move forward with it so we could actually implement it in a cycle as opposed to just continuing to kick it down the road.
Okay. How do you all feel about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it should be inclusive of anything and everything that the subcommittees would consider. When you meet, like, for example, with the penalties committee, you're giving them the current charter language. So if they have any issues or concerns about current charter language that they would contemplate reviewing or recommending changes to.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't for the first meeting because the first meeting is like an intro to what we're talking about and the scope and everything like that. We talked through some policy things. Um, but the charter language doesn't really mention a lot about penalties, and so I haven't done a full presentation like I have with you all. I do want to make sure, like, if we're having this conversation about recommendations, I can, on Monday, I can add in a little bit of time or just kind of do a very brief run through. I do want to be careful about it because we do have like very large items on the agenda, and we have to obviously get through those. But if we put aside like a little bit of time, I think that would be okay.
Yeah,
And-
just the temperature check, I think, is fine. Yeah.
Just a temperature check. Okay.
And I've already told Daniel, but I am not currently able to attend. I mean, I'm going to be definitely out of Portland. I don't think I'm able to attend that meeting on Monday night. I will talk with my dad and stepmom and see, like if I can like arrange something, but I'm not in town. So I'm uncertain about my attendance on the Monday meeting. Okay.
We will-
I guess my question to you, James, what's your temperature on charter change?
I mean, to me, I am not if you think that I'm a hard no, that's not exactly the position. But
I
like
don't
I
know. I
really
was just asking. Like,
what's that? Oh yeah.
I was just genuinely asking. I don't know if you're a
Yeah.
hard no or not. I just sort of was like, what's your temperature check?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think like in my mind, all of these things are kind of like a balance, and I really believe in public, matching. And if there was like an opportunity to like combine, if we wanted to take a real run at like a dedicated funding source that would make this like, that voters approve, that would give this some stability, like that would be worth to me, like adjusting some of the other
I agree
things
with
in
that.
the charter. But it would kind of like be a balance. I think that a lot of the limitations in the charter are net positive, even though I understand they're negative in other ways. But like I would be open to revisiting it for sure.
I am in the same place actually. I feel like I don't really. I'm sort of like the county staff is wild and a hot mess right now, and I don't like it. And I'll just be frank about that. But like, I feel like I believe in the public financing program so much, and I think fundamentally, if you want to change democracies, the voter-owned elections is actually the way to go about doing that. And what I saw in the city of Portland of this last round is underfunding a program and forcing and like not letting the cream rise to the top because of that underfunding of the program. And so I would much rather us have a very robust, clearly funded program. And I'm willing to risk a lot of other things to have that happen on public financing because I am such a believer that this is actually the biggest, most impactful democracy reform tool is public financing.
And to me, I think we're like totally aligned there. I would say even maybe more important than like robustly funded. Like I would go for like moderately, like if candidates can see like, oh, there's a path here. Like I actually think stably funded is like more important than the
Predictably
delta.
funded. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Utterly
I will
stable.
say with you, like, I think stably funded, but to me, I maybe robust is my ideal, but
Me
I feel
too.
like solidly funded so that
Right.
people can actually get their message out, and that fundamentally it's a way for people who have big networks who can actually do the like grassroots sort of
Yep.
what like retail politics. Like I would much rather people spend, you know, 500 hours raising $5 at a time than $500 trying to raise $5,000 or $3,500 at a time. Like
Yep.
to
Totally.
me, that level of like that retail politics and those matching, it just changes. It fundamentally changed the city of Portland. I think it fundamentally changes things. And so whatever we have to do to get to that, I think I have much more, I'm much more down for. And I also, whatever we are gonna do, I do not want to lose that at the ballot in Multnomah County.
Right.
Yes.
So I think we have a lot of stuff to do between now and that November if we're going to do a referral to make sure that we don't lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're here.
Full consensus.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. I will just say, as like someone went through the Portland trial by fire, you know, the fact that we never had stable funding and it was always like up to the council every year was very challenging, and it
Yeah.
created a whole host of headaches. And I felt very, you felt bad for the candidates who had to go through that because like they didn't really know what to expect, and I imagine that's extremely frustrating. And so,
And the funding changing in the middle of the cycle. Man,
No, I
That was
know.
so
Wheeler.
ugly.
And yeah,
That
it's
was so ugly. Like I think
ridiculous.
it was, yeah, it was
And
ridiculous. It was totally
anti-democracy.
ridiculous.
it is.
Yeah.
It's true.
yeah,
Right.
true.
So even
Well,
I feel like on this, like even if we force the timeline, like let's say we can't get to a stable funding, if we force the timeline of the county where it is like you have to set the budget for this 2
Right.
years in
Right?
advance, and
You
it
cannot
cannot change.
change it, or yeah, exactly.
You can't, like, I'm down for all of those things too around how we get there. And then my other thing is
Yeah.
simplicity. Alignment and simplicity feel like it is actually real. Nobody does in kinds at the city of Portland because it's too complicated
totally.
and you can't figure it out. Like, I think the small donor committee stuff at the Multnomah County right now is too complicated. So, like, you have to be willing to do a whole bunch of stuff that, frankly, our own attorney would say is too sketchy. Like, even though we clearly are a small donor committee, like, there's no, like, I pray and wish I had a donor who gave over $250. I think I'm the only donor who gives over $250. That's why my name is on all of that City of Portland literature.
You remember that?
You're the top donor.
But my favorite thing was I was at the nail salon when some of those ads came on. Somebody literally looked at me and goes, "Did you pay for that ad?"
Yes.
No.
I wrote one check.
Nope, I did not pay for that.
So funny.
But so I feel like
Well-
that to me, I feel like those consensus pieces to me and like the in-kind and the other stuff, like for this committee is like, we're really nipping at the edges around what fundamentally we want to be a successful, like small, like matching contribution fund in the small donor program and a voter owned program.
Mhm.
And I'll talk about this more on Monday, but we actually do have a lot of flexibility in the distributing of the public funds and the matching funds, and we can do it in a way that's very simple and straightforward for candidates and the public to understand. So I'm excited to have that discussion with you all on Monday. And of course, like seems like stable funding is something that we should definitely be talking about, of course, on Monday too, and continually after that. Well, unless there's anything else, we'll let you all go. Have your evening back. I know it was a shock, good thing getting the constraint news, but I really appreciate that you all took the time to talk about that and discuss like next steps on it too.
Yeah, this was really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye,
All right.
everyone.
Thank you,
Good
everybody.
to see you all.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.